The most famous fact about the Great Wall of China is a lie, and once that lie collapses, what rises behind it is far stranger. Hidden doors, living stone, buried grief, and a truth so unsettling it changes everything you thought you knew. What if the most famous fact about the Great Wall of China is not just wrong, but so wrong that it has blinded us to everything that actually makes the wall terrifyingly fascinating? For years, I heard the same line repeated as if it were sacred truth, that the Great Wall is the only man-made structure visible from space with the naked eye. People say it with confidence. Teachers repeat it. Documentaries casually mention it. Tourists carry it around like a polished jewel of human achievement. And maybe that is exactly why it has survived for so long, because it sounds too perfect to question. A wall so colossal, so unnatural, so dominant that even the planet itself cannot hide it. But that story falls apart the moment you look closer. Astronauts have said it. Experts have clarified it. From orbit, the Great Wall does not blaze across Earth like a scar. It does not rise from the landscape like some obvious line dividing civilization from wilderness. It disappears. It blends into mountains, dust, ridges, and shadows. It vanishes into the skin of the land itself. And the first time I really let that sink in, I realized something unsettling. If the one fact almost everyone knows about the Great Wall is false, then what else have we been getting wrong all this time? That is the moment this stopped being just history for me. Because once that myth cracks, the entire monument begins to feel different. Less like a postcard, less like a tourist landmark, less like a giant old wall you check off a bucket list, and more like something layered, hidden, and deeply misunderstood. The kind of thing humanity thinks it understands simply because it is famous. But fame is not understanding. Sometimes fame is camouflage. Welcome to Hidden Truth Channel. I want to take you with me into that camouflage, because the deeper I looked into the Great Wall, the stranger it became. Not stranger in the cheap, sensational way people throw around online, but stranger in the way real history becomes when you strip away the polished version and confront the raw one. A monument that looks simple from a distance starts revealing secrets that feel almost impossible up close. A wall that should be easy to define starts slipping out of every definition. It is not just stone. It is not just defense. It is not just an ancient border. It is chemistry, deception, endurance, fear, adaptation, and memory compressed into one of the largest human creations on Earth. And what grips me most is this. The Great Wall may be one of the clearest examples of how civilization hides its deepest truths in plain sight. We are shown the image, but not the meaning. We are handed the legend, but not the cost. We are taught the symbol, but not the secrets buried beneath it. So before we go any further, subscribe to the channel and support Hidden Truth Channel, because if stories like this pull you in, the kind that begin with one lie and open into an entire world of forgotten truths, then you are exactly where you need to be. Because tonight, we are not looking at the Great Wall the way tourists see it. We are not looking at it as a scenic ruin or a patriotic symbol or a line on a map. We are going to look at it the way I think it deserves to be seen, as a gigantic mechanism built by human ambition, wrapped in myth, and still hiding things most people have never been taught to notice. And the most disturbing part is this. The more clearly you see it, the less it looks like a wall, and the more it looks like a warning. And once I stopped seeing the Great Wall as a symbol and started seeing it as a system, the first thing that truly shook me was this. In some places, the wall did not weaken with age the way it was supposed to. That detail stayed with me because it cuts directly against what we instinctively believe about the past. We are used to thinking that old things decay, that ancient materials crumble, that time always wins. There is something comforting about that idea, maybe because it reassures us that modern people, with our machines and formulas and engineering software, have moved beyond the limitations of those who came before us. But the Great Wall has a way of humiliating that kind of confidence. When restoration teams began working on remote sections of the wall, they expected damaged masonry to behave like damaged masonry. Remove the broken parts, stabilize the foundation, replace what time had taken. Simple, predictable, rational. But in some of those encounters, the old structure did something deeply unnerving. It resisted. Heavy machinery struck ancient sections that should have shattered under modern force, and instead the impact seemed to expose the opposite truth. The wall was still holding. In some cases, the force meant to break it reportedly broke the tools first. I keep coming back to that image in my mind. Steel teeth hitting centuries-old masonry, sparks flying, and the wall refusing to yield. Not because I think it proves anything supernatural, but because I understand exactly why moments like that ignite the human imagination. When the past behaves in ways that seem to embarrass the present, people immediately begin reaching for myth. Secret formulas, lost civilizations, knowledge too advanced for its time, maybe even something not fully human. We have always done that. Whenever history becomes too impressive, we try to exile it from ordinary human capability. And yet the real answer, in this case, may be even more astonishing precisely because it is so humble. Rice, not gold, not blood, not some forbidden compound whispered about by alchemists. Rice. The first time I learned that sticky rice mortar may have played a crucial role in parts of the Great Wall, I remember feeling that rare kind of fascination that is almost childlike. Because there is something beautiful about a truth that sounds ridiculous at first and then grows more profound the more you sit with it. The same civilization that cooked rice, ate rice, survived by rice, also discovered that rice could help hold stone together. That is not just a technical fact to me. It feels like a glimpse into how deeply intelligence can be woven into everyday life. Researchers who studied ancient mortar samples found evidence that builders, especially during the Ming period, mixed slaked lime with sticky rice soup. Chemically, that combination was extraordinary. Sticky rice contains amylopectin, a complex carbohydrate that appears to have influenced the formation of the mortar's microstructure, helping create a denser and more resilient material. In practical terms, the mortar became stronger, more cohesive, and more resistant than anyone would expect from something made with ingredients that sound almost domestic. That contrast is what keeps pulling me in. We tend to divide history into categories that feel emotionally neat. The kitchen belongs to ordinary life. The fortress belongs to power. Food belongs to survival. Architecture belongs to empire. But the wall collapses those categories. Suddenly, a bowl and a battlement are connected. Suddenly, one of the greatest military structures in history owes part of its endurance to something as familiar as porridge. And the deeper implication is even more striking. This was not brute engineering. It was intelligent engineering. It was observation sharpened by repetition, refined by trial and error, preserved by craft. The builders may not have spoken in the language of polymers, inhibitors, or crystalline structure, but they understood performance. They knew what failed. They knew what lasted. They knew that some combinations of material behave differently over time. That kind of knowledge deserves more respect than it usually receives because it reminds us that sophistication does not begin when modern vocabulary begins. In fact, what makes this mortar so hauntingly impressive is that it seems to reverse the emotional logic of ruins. We expect old structures to become fragile with age, but this material, absorbing carbon dioxide over time and hardening through long exposure, suggests something almost poetic, that the wall drew strength from the very atmosphere surrounding it. As the centuries passed, it did not simply endure time. In some sense, it continued negotiating with time. That idea affects me more than I expected, because the Great Wall stops feeling like a dead object when you think about it that way. It becomes an argument between human intention and the elements, and in some stretches, human intention was astonishingly well prepared. The mortar did not just bind bricks. It carried forward a kind of accumulated patience, a lesson learned, mixed, spread, and left behind for centuries to prove itself. And maybe that is what I find most moving here. The real mystery is not that ancient builders had magic. It is that they had attention. They watched the world closely enough to discover that something soft could make something hard stronger. They found a way to put flexibility inside strength, life inside structure, nourishment inside defense. And in doing so, they created a material so effective that centuries later, it could still shock the people sent to tear it apart. To me, that is where the Great Wall begins to feel truly unsettling. Not because it belongs to fantasy, but because it forces us to confront how much genius history can hide inside the ordinary. And once you realize the wall was held together by intelligence rather than myth, the next question becomes even more haunting. What exactly was hidden inside the story people told about the lives sacrificed to build it? There is a reason the Great Wall does not live in history alone. It lives in grief. It lives in folklore. It lives in the kinds of stories people whisper because raw facts are sometimes too cold to carry the weight of human suffering on their own. And of all those stories, one of the most unforgettable is the legend of Meng Jiangnu, the young woman whose husband was taken away to work on the wall shortly after their marriage. She waited, heard nothing, and finally set out to find him herself, carrying winter clothes for the man she still believed might be alive. But when she arrived, she learned the truth. He had died from exhaustion. In the most tragic versions of the tale, his body had been buried inside the wall itself, swallowed by the very monument he had helped build. Her grief was said to be so immense that her crying caused part of the wall to collapse, exposing human remains beneath the stone. The first time I sat with that story, what struck me was not whether it was literally true. It was how emotionally inevitable it felt. Because when a civilization builds something so vast that it seems to dwarf human life, people instinctively begin asking the moral question the structure itself cannot answer. How many lives did this cost, and where did those lives go? A monument of that scale almost demands a ghost story. It demands a tale large enough to give shape to invisible suffering. And so the Great Wall became more than a military structure. In the public imagination, it became a grave stretched across the landscape, a place where ambition and death had fused into one endless line of stone. That belief endured for centuries, and I understand why. It turns anonymous labor into personal tragedy. It transforms engineering into mourning. It makes the wall feel less like a triumph and more like a wound. But what stays with me even more is the way archaeology complicates that image. Investigations across multiple sections of the wall have not supported the idea that bodies were routinely entombed inside the structure as a construction method. And in a strangely sobering way, the reason is brutally practical. Human remains decompose. Decomposition creates voids. Voids weaken masonry. Any engineer, ancient or modern, would understand that burying bodies directly inside load-bearing construction would eventually undermine the stability of the wall itself. That detail matters because it reveals something I find deeply human. The story was wrong in a literal sense, but right in a moral sense. Workers did die in enormous numbers. That part was never fiction. Archaeologists have found burial areas and mass graves near sections of large-scale construction, placed outside the structure rather than inside it. So the wall was not built on bones in the mechanical way legend suggested, but it absolutely rose out of a reality filled with exhaustion, forced labor, separation, hunger, and death. The myth did not invent suffering. It gave suffering a face. And just when the wall begins to feel like a monument of grief, it transforms again, this time not into something haunted, but into something almost impossibly adaptive. Because the image most of us inherit is so narrow. We picture the wall as a gray ribbon of brick and stone snaking over mountains, and that image is powerful enough that it overwhelms every other version. But move westward into the Gobi Desert, and that familiar wall begins to dissolve. There are regions where the landscape offers no generous supply of stone, no easy brick production, no lush environment to support the kind of construction people imagine when they hear the words Great Wall of China. There is only exposure, dryness, wind, gravel, sand, and the kind of emptiness that seems determined to erase all signs of human intention. And yet, the wall is there too. That may be one of the most underappreciated wonders in the entire story. Not that a wall exists in the mountains, where stone belongs, but that a wall was made to endure in places where the land itself feels hostile to permanence. Builders in those regions worked with what the desert gave them. They layered reeds or branches with sand, gravel, and earth, building not with ideal materials, but with available ones. In some places, salty water appears to have played a critical role, because as moisture evaporated, salts crystallized and helped bind the mass together. Plant material acted almost like internal reinforcement, while compacted layers created surprising stability. It was not elegant in the polished, monumental sense. It was elegant in a deeper sense, the elegance of adaptation. That is what moves me most about this section of the wall's story. It forces me to stop thinking of the Great Wall as one perfect object and start seeing it as a chain of responses to radically different realities. It was never just one wall. It was many solutions wearing the same historical name. In one place, lime and brick. In another, rammed earth. In another, branches, gravel, sand, and salt holding the line against a landscape that should have swallowed them whole. The wall survived not because it was uniform, but because it was flexible enough to change without losing its purpose. And when I place these two truths side by side, the legend of bones in the wall and the reality of desert engineering, I feel like I'm looking at the monument in a more honest way. One side of it is emotional truth, the human pain that great projects leave behind. The other side is technical truth, the quiet brilliance required to make anything survive in an unforgiving world. Together, they tell a story that is far richer than either myth or fact alone. The Great Wall was not just built by power. It was built by sacrifice, by invention, by loss, and by the stubborn refusal of human beings to surrender to either nature or memory. And after seeing how the wall absorbed suffering and adapted to the land itself, I began to understand something even more surprising. This was never just a barrier. It was a living system of deception, survival, and communication. For a long time, I think most of us were taught to imagine the Great Wall in the simplest possible way. A defensive line, high, thick, solid, immovable. A giant physical statement that said one thing to the outside world: you do not pass. And from a distance, that interpretation feels convincing. When you look at restored sections stretching across mountain ridges, the wall appears absolute. It looks like the architecture of permanence. the kind of structure built not only to stop movement, but to erase uncertainty. Yet the more I look into it, the more I feel that this image hides the wall's real genius. Because what appears rigid was, in truth, far more cunning. One of the most astonishing discoveries in recent years was the identification of more than 130 hidden passages concealed within certain stretches of the wall. What strikes me is not just the number, but the intention behind them. These were not obvious gates meant to be admired. They were disguised so carefully that from the outside they blended into the masonry itself. To an approaching enemy, the wall appeared seamless, closed, impenetrable. But from within, these masked openings gave defenders the ability to move, surprise, flank, scout, and react. The wall was not just a shield, it was a trap with a calm face. That changes the emotional meaning of the structure for me. Suddenly, I no longer see soldiers trapped behind stone, waiting passively for whatever came over the horizon. I see a military mind at work, patient, strategic, and psychologically sharp. The wall could hide its own intentions. It could look still while preparing movement. And I think there is something deeply unsettling about that. The most effective defenses are often not the ones that merely resist attack, but the ones that manipulate what the enemy believes they are seeing. The Great Wall, in that sense, was not only built to block force, it was built to shape perception. But not all of its hidden defenses came from human hands. Some were created slowly, quietly, by nature itself. There were long periods when sections of the wall, especially those made from rammed earth in drier regions, appeared sickly and neglected, covered in dark crusts, patches of moss, and rough biological growth that many people assumed were signs of decay. At first glance, it looked like the monument was being consumed from the outside in, as if time had sent microscopic scavengers to finish what weather had started. And yet, when scientists studied those surfaces more closely, they found something almost poetic. What looked like damage was, in many cases, protection. These biological crusts, communities of mosses, lichens, and microorganisms, were helping stabilize the surface, binding loose material together and shielding it from wind and water erosion. The wall, in a very real sense, had grown a skin. I can't help being moved by that idea. A structure built to resist nature ultimately survived in part because nature chose to collaborate with it. There is something profoundly humbling in that. Human beings laid the foundation, but life itself stepped in to preserve what would otherwise have been lost. The wall was no longer just architecture. It had entered a relationship with the landscape, one that blurred the boundary between artifact and organism. And then there was the final revelation that completed the picture for me. The wall was not silent. It spoke. Through its network of beacon towers, signals could travel across vast distances with astonishing speed. Smoke by day, fire by night, patterns visible from tower to tower, carrying warnings across mountains and remote frontiers far faster than any lone rider could have hoped to travel. This was not just defense in the physical sense. It was information warfare before the modern world had language for it. The Empire had built not only a wall, but a nervous system. And once I understood that, the Great Wall stopped looking to me like an old monument fading into history. It began to look like something far more unsettling and far more alive. A structure that could conceal openings, wear a living shield, and send messages across the horizon faster than fear itself. And yet after everything the wall could do, endure, adapt, conceal, and communicate, the final truth it led me to was the most human one of all. Even the greatest structure in the world cannot save a civilization from itself. That, to me, is the deepest paradox of the Great Wall. The more I learned about its brilliance, the more tragic its story became. Because this was not a crude barrier thrown up in fear. It was an extraordinary achievement of planning, labor, strategy, and imagination. It stretched across impossible terrain. It absorbed the knowledge of generations. It embodied the belief that if human beings worked hard enough, built carefully enough, and sacrificed enough, they could draw a line against chaos and hold it there. But history has a cruel way of exposing the weakness no architect can fully design against. The wall was built from stone, earth, lime, salt, signals, and discipline. But it was also built on trust. It depended on watchmen staying alert, commanders staying loyal, soldiers believing the empire behind them was still worthy of protection. And when that trust weakened, the wall's strength was no longer enough. Because walls do not fail only when they are broken. Sometimes they fail when they are opened. That is why the story of invasions and betrayals hits harder than any image of battle ever could. The greatest danger was not always the enemy at the gate. Sometimes it was the fear, greed, resentment, or exhaustion inside the gate. A fortification can resist pressure from the outside for centuries, but a single act of human weakness can undo what generations of labor tried to make permanent. I think that is what makes the Great Wall feel so modern to me. Its lesson is ancient, but painfully current. No system is stronger than the people entrusted to uphold it. And still, I do not look at that as the wall's total failure, because even if it did not permanently stop conquest, it achieved something its builders may never have imagined. It outlived its military purpose and became something larger than defense. Today, people from all over the world climb its stones not to divide themselves from others, but to touch the evidence of human determination. What was meant to separate has become something that connects. What was built to keep people out now draws people in. And maybe that is the final lesson I take from it. The walls we build around fear rarely last in the way we intend. Time changes them, history reinterprets them, and in the end, the strongest walls do not remain walls forever. They become memory, warning, and witness. The Great Wall survived not because it kept danger away forever, but because it preserved something more enduring. Proof of how far human beings will go to protect what they love, and how fragile even the grandest protections become when the human heart begins to crack. And when I step back from everything we have uncovered, I think the Great Wall leaves us with a lesson far more powerful than the myths that first drew us in. Yes, it is a marvel of engineering. Yes, it is a monument to endurance, invention, and discipline. But beneath all of that, it is also a reminder that the strongest things human beings build are never made of material alone. They are made of trust, purpose, memory, sacrifice, and belief. The wall survived storms, deserts, mountains, and centuries of erosion. Yet even something that immense could never fully protect a civilization from fear, complacency, betrayal, or human weakness. And that is what makes its story feel so personal to me. Because in our own lives, we are constantly building walls of one kind or another, around our hearts, around our ambitions, around our families, around the things we are afraid to lose. We work hard to create stability. We try to make ourselves secure. We search for something solid enough to hold back uncertainty. But the Great Wall teaches us that real strength does not come only from building higher barriers. It also comes from wisdom, adaptability, vigilance, and the character of the people standing behind those walls. In today's world, I think that lesson matters more than ever. Protect your life, your values, and your future. But do not rely only on appearances, systems, or structures. Build trust carefully, stay alert, keep learning, adapt when circumstances change, and most importantly, do not let comfort make you careless. Because the greatest danger is not always the force outside your life. sometimes it is the quiet weakness growing within it. If there is one lesson I would carry from the Great Wall into modern life, it is this. True security is never just about what you build around yourself, but about what you build within yourself. Before you go, I'd love to hear your thoughts. What do you think is the greatest lesson the Great Wall of China teaches us today? Please share your answer in the comments so everyone can read different perspectives and learn from one another. And if you enjoyed this journey with Hidden Truth Channel, please subscribe and support the channel so we can keep creating more powerful stories like this in the future.